Hey, llama, red pajama, reads a story.
Thank you. My name is Miral Sattar, and I started out as an engineer, and I did a lot of product development. And then in 2011, I moved into books. Before that, I was at Time Magazine. I ran the product development group for them. And I have a platform that helps authors find influencers and with their marketing and basically everything book launches. So that's kind of my day job is I help authors and publishers launch their books with the SEO optimization, helping them get the reviews, the whole strategy. But a few years ago, I saw that there was a need. My 3-year-old daughter at the time was reading Thumbelina over and over again. And what we found was when we would read it, we'd have to change the storyline a little bit every single time. So, because I don't know if everyone here still reads Thumbelina, but she goes from being passed from like a frog to another person and another person. She never really had any choices in her life. And that's kind of not what I wanted to model for my kids. And we would read fairy tales, and we just found that my husband and I found that we would just change the plot a lot. So that's where the idea of my podcast, Bearily Bear Reimagined Fairy Tales, came. I started rewriting fairy tales. It's a spin on traditional fairy tales, but the characters are diverse. They are problem solvers, and they save themselves usually. So, and then also they also touch on, current issues a little bit. So, one of my most recent one, Three Billy Goats Gruff, is about three goats who are trying to cross a bridge, but they're not allowed to because the people on the other side are afraid of them. But one side has lush valleys and the other side is basically desolate, but then they eventually cross over. So it's kind of like a little bit about immigration and how we treat people from other countries. There's another one. My most popular story is Sleeping Beauty, and she is a neurodivergent princess, and a school teacher helps me write all the stories, and then we turn them into podcasts.
It's amazing. And I want to tell people, in case they're not familiar with your podcast, that Common Sense Media chose it as one of the best podcasts of the year, and Romper recently picked it as one of the best story podcasts for kids. So I guess one thing that I was curious about is, so why a podcast? So you saw these fairy tales needed to be reimagined. So what made you think that, okay, the best format to do that is going to be a podcast?
So I'm a mom of 3 kids, and my kids love listening to stories, and they love listening to audio stories. And back when I started, there weren't that many out there. So, and it's something that they could do that's relaxing, that they could do in the car or they could do before bedtime. We kind of just play the podcast for them for 20 minutes. Like we do our reading, we have a reading routine, we read with them, we talk about their day, but then they still have all this extra energy, and the podcast kind of just helps them relax and go to sleep. So it's kind of like a nice little bedtime perk that they have, and you can kind of just turn it on and let them listen to it. And it's actually one of my friends was saying that it helps her son during his commute to school. He doesn't like being in the car, but when he listens to the podcast, it gives him something to listen to. So I just think it's powerful. And also my middle child has really bad motion sickness, so he can't read in the car. But there's data that shows that listening to podcasts and stories actually helps with that. So we always listen to podcasts.
Oh, that's a great, and I would imagine also for like reluctant readers who don't want to sit down and read a book, sometimes listening to a podcast doesn't have that same feel, like where they might feel like it's a chore to sit down and read, but if they're listening to something, maybe that seems a little more fun.
Yeah, and also it's a way to reduce screen time. So when we produce the stories, the goal is that you're competing against TV, or you're competing against them watching shows. So we try to make the stories as fun as possible. We have the sound effects, so kids feel like they're listening to a show, which I think we've been successful in that.
And so let's back up to the idea about reimagining these fairy tales. So they're kind of, I think, I would imagine you've got 2 camps, the opposite sides that are kind of that maybe you hear from. And one of them would say, why reimagine these fairy tales at all? They're these old stories, but obviously you see that they still have value. Why are these stories worth saving?
These stories are worth saving because they're stories that everybody listens to, everybody loves. The new Little Mermaid was so cool, and there are always reboots, but it's also super important that children see themselves in stories, and not just one particular type of children, but everybody should be able to see themselves in stories. Like growing up, I never had fairy tales, which featured princesses that look like me. And now my daughter, who is 9, has so many role models that she can look up to, for girls that look like her. My first story was about Princess and the Pea, and she lived in a tower, but all she wanted to do was read books. So instead of ending up being married to the prince, they go and discover the palace library together, and then they become friends, and then maybe they get married. You don't know, but that was kind of like the thread that. And especially we live in a culture where the goal is not to get married, always seems to focus on looks, and you should get married, you should have children. And especially coming from a traditional background like myself, that was kind of the messaging that I got, and I did not want that for my kids.
Yeah, I think that's good for people to know. It's not just that you've changed them to make them more inclusive, but the whole storyline or kind of the goal, like you said, it's different, and it features girls who are problem solvers and not just waiting for a prince to come and rescue them.
Yes, exactly.
And so on the other hand, you would also have people who are the purists who love fairy tales or these stories and don't want them to change and think that you should keep them exactly like they are. What do you say? Because I'm sure you must hear that a lot. What is your response to people that say that, no, we should just leave these as they are?
Well, they're already there. If you want to listen to those stories or read about them, you can listen to those versions of those stories. And if you want something a little different, if you want something a little bit more inclusive, you can listen to Barely Bear fairy tales or stories like mine. Like everything is available. If you don't like reimagined princesses, if you don't like princesses of color, you don't have to read these fairy tales. But there are enough, you don't have to listen to these fairy tales, but there are enough people who do love them. And I think we hit like 200,000 listeners a few weeks ago. So that there is demand, and parents do want to share these stories with their children.
Right. Well, congratulations. That's
Thank
a
you.
huge milestone, by the way. That's really wonderful. And like you said, I mean, obviously there is demand, or you wouldn't have that many listeners. How do you decide? So say you pick a story that you want to reinvent. How do you decide which elements you're going to keep and how you're going to rework it? Like, how much do you feel like you have to retain from the old story so it's not completely new, but yet it has that new twist to it?
Well, there's been different ways that we've done it, because the most important thing is, will a kid like listening to it, and is it really interesting? So there's one story that we have coming out, which is about Rumpelstiltskin, but it's based on that. But the theme behind it is child labor. So, and if you listen carefully, you'll find that theme. But if you don't, it's just another variation of the story with the characters changed up. So we have worksheets for each story. They feature a different country. We want to make it educational. We want to make it interesting. We want to make it fun. And then also a little bit true to the original story, but also different enough that kids aren't going to feel bored listening to the same story again. Like, it's not Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in the same storyline. It's a variation of Snow White, which has elements of consent, but the prince doesn't kiss her when she's sleeping. They end up working together. So that's kind of what we do. Like, we keep maybe like the framework of the old original story, or actually, you know what? There is no original stories. The fairy tale origins come from hundreds of different sources, right, and hundreds of different places. And one misconception is a lot of people think that the Grimm brothers are the original writers of these fairy tales, but the Grimm brothers actually just collected fairy tales from around Germany and around the world to maintain culture, their culture, and they kind of changed them up a little bit. But Cinderella, there's variations of Cinderella that come from China and Egypt. And so there are slight variations of each one, and some of them are very violent, but some of them are very pleasant, or the morals are different. So that's kind of how we decide.
And probably too, I would imagine, I mean, we know the Grimm brothers, they wrote these stories down, but who knows what they were like before.
Yeah.
Even in Germany, they had probably always been changing, but when somebody wrote them down, suddenly they stopped changing.
Yes.
Or at least not as much as they had been. So maybe that's just part of the natural evolution, is that they always kind of update with the times.
Yes.
And this is definitely an update that we need for today.
Exactly. That's an excellent point.
Well, I want to make sure we talk about your other work. And one of the things that I'm really interested in, and actually how I first found out about you, was through social media, before I even knew you had a podcast. And you make such great use of social media. Wow. I talk to a lot of authors and that really don't like social media. They feel like they really have to stretch themselves to use it, and they do it because they know they have to, or they're supposed to. So what is it that you love about it? Because you seem like you were just really adept at it and make such great use of it. What is so wonderful about it, you think, or can be?
Well, so I'll be honest, I don't love social media, and I'm not on social media every day. But I do think that if you have a story, or if you want to share a book, you do need to be on social media. And for me, social media was a way to just reach a wider audience for people who are always asking me for recommendations. Instead of texting everybody individually, I just put it all in one channel. And I think social media can be unhealthy sometimes if consumed too much, but there are ways to make it manageable. So I think the thing that's overwhelming about social media is that people think they need to be on it all the time. But I just do social media on Mondays, and I write the scripts, I queue up the content, and I do the recording, and I make my content for 2 weeks on Mondays, and I spend an hour, and that's it. And then I don't have my notifications on. I just log in just to see how the posts are performing. And I do that for I also run social media accounts for my clients too. And that's kind of what I do for them too, is I check in, I give them guidelines. Because if you're on social media all the time, I think it does take a toll on mental health. So I think you need to be able to manage your social media. And then, and I do that. I just do it on Mondays. So this week I didn't, we had something come up on Monday, so I wasn't able to queue everything up, but I did queue everything up right before the Instagram live right now. So today was the day. It's all about time management, and I'm not on every single platform. For me, I'm on Instagram and TikTok, and you can cross promote and leverage. And I think that those two platforms work really well for children's content and media and podcasts. And those are the main platforms where I promoted my podcasts and the inclusive books that I share on my channels.
What do you think is about them that makes them so good for promoting children's books?
The visuals are really nice. And then also I like TikTok because you could curate and customize your own audiences, and you can curate your audience to target just parents or people who love your content. And a lot of it is educational. And same with Instagram. It's highly visual. The video format works really well for someone like me. And that's kind of what I love about it. Twitter, I don't think does so well with books anymore. Facebook I don't think really does so well with books anymore. So I think those are kind of the best channels, and YouTube, except I haven't actually made it onto YouTube yet. So
have you gotten on Threads at all?
I've played around with it, yes.
Yeah.
So I think I'll probably explore that and test that a little bit more and see how the data goes.
That's about where we are. We're on it, but still kind of figuring it out.
Yeah.
But it does seem like there are a lot of kidlit people that have jumped to there.
Yeah.
So potential. But so tell us a little bit more, since you kind of talked a little bit about social media and how it can be used to promote children's books. So I want to make sure you get to talk about what you do for authors. You kind of mentioned it some, but can you tell us more about that? And is that the one that you're rebranding as the Zara's Media?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So I have multiple platforms and kind of consolidating into one. I run a social media agency for authors, SEO and social media services for authors and publishers. So if you're launching a book or launching a podcast, you can work with me or my team, and we can make sure that you will get found, read, and followed.
What do you think is maybe one of the top tips you would give, or something a mistake that you see people make a lot when they're doing that sort of a thing?
So a lot of people I talk to, they're like, well, I'm on Instagram or I'm on TikTok, but they're not consistent about the posts that they do, or their messaging is not clear. So I would recommend is find people in the space who are performing really well and just kind of see what they're doing and be consistent about your posts. Decide whether you're going to post once a week, but don't post once a week on Tuesdays and then the next week post on Thursdays, because you kind of want to tailor your audience so they know the content that they know that they expect from you. And the same with TikTok too, is you want to be consistent and keep your messaging simple and just pick one thing to promote. Otherwise, you'll never find your target audience.
Oh, that's interesting, because I think that makes sense about, I know I've heard that about the consistency, but also that's interesting about keeping the messaging simple, especially because that's a format where people tend to scroll a lot.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to do too much, like I can see that would get kind of muddled or missed to a lot of people. Yeah. So what, just to wrap up, do you have any projects that are coming up? Like I know you said you were going to be consolidating into one, under kind of one umbrella, or what projects are you working on right now? Or Fairytales that are going to be coming out soon? Or
yeah, season 3 is going to be coming out in September. We took a little break for the summer, and I'm really excited about season 3. And then I'm also launching an influencer platform for books and podcasts coming out soon. So that's coming out in 2024. So
wait, tell us more. What is that, the influencer platform?
Oh, so the thing that a lot of authors and publishers and podcasts struggle with when they first launch is, how do I spread the word about my new podcast or about my new book, or how do I find these people? So this will be like a subscription platform where you can find the influencers that you need, ranging from micro influencers to nano influencers to big influencers, to kind of get the word out about your book. Because one of the best, there's a video that I have on my Instagram that keeps going viral. I think it might be at 5 million views right now. Wow. But it is a layover that I did, and a lot of my followers come from that. It's just a reading of Ludacris doing Llama Llama Red Pajama, and I'm flipping the pages, and I credit him and I credit his music, and his music is overlaid on there. But people love it, and tons of people have bought the book. So every time, whenever I reshare or I feature that, my following will grow. So it's kind of just keeping everything super simple.
Story with who? With his mama. Hey, mama kisses, what? Baby hair.